I'm going to move on to our last speaker, and then we will have more time, hopefully a few minutes to discuss things further at the end. And our last speaker is, in fact, Naomi Baryam, so who asked that question. So it's a wonderful inroad to that. Naomi is a close colleague that I've known for many years and who has worked for over 30 years as an educator, researcher, advocate, and writer. She has been the past president of the Human Milk Banking Association of North America, and she's the founding director of the Mother's Milk Bank Northeast in Boston, where I was fortunate enough to spend some of my time a couple of years ago when we were all able to travel and meet in person as opposed to being separate, which is also how Aliette and I originally met each other, because it was thanks to Naomi introducing the two of us that we, during that time that I was in North America, spent some time working together. Naomi is also a sociologist like myself. And so we've spent many years talking about these things and thinking about them. I could go on forever. She's given amazing contributions throughout North America and in Israel and around the world in terms of thinking about milk banking. And in fact, one of her early papers was one of the key papers in the NICE guidelines about bereavement. And so I'm absolutely thrilled that Naomi is here to speak to us. So I'll turn it over to Naomi now. Naomi?
She's just coming in now. I'm just getting her to unmute there. Hi, Naomi. Okay.
There we go. Let me get to my screen. Can everybody see that?
Yep, that's coming up now.
Right screen. Awesome. Okay. Too many screens.
Actually, Naomi, I was going to say that Aliette was going to, did you have anything you wanted to say too? Because to introduce Naomi, we were both fighting over who would introduce you.
No, but I will not take much time of everybody. It's just that I'm very happy to see you, and yeah, I have my own history, but I will share it later privately. So thank you. Good luck, Naomi.
Okay, thank you so much for inviting me. This has been really an amazing, lots of things I learned surely about donating around grief across the world. And one of the things about being the final speaker is a lot of what I have to say has already been said, but it could be reinforced, but I also get to kind of, like I said, reinforce some things. So I will be, I guess, in countries representing North America, which is an honor in itself. And we'll be talking about sort of growing around grief. And let me see if I can advance my slides. There we go. So a wonderful quote that I read recently: people tend to believe that grief shrinks over time. What really happens is that we grow around our grief. And that is a quote from Lois Tonkin, who was a writer and thinker and grief counselor for many years. And I don't know that much more about her, except the little that I've read, but that is such a true statement that we will think for the next few minutes about what that means for loss, for parents who lose their children. So perinatal loss is unique. The death of a child is unique. It's really different than any other loss. It's different than a spouse or a parent or a sibling. It really is out of the natural order. And perinatal loss is unique even in the loss of a child, because as many have pointed out, memories help us find meaning in any of our losses, in any loss that we experience. And in perinatal loss, there are few, if any, memories to help us find that meaning. Parents want not only to remember their own infant, they want others to remember their infant. Just as when we lose anyway, I just observed the anniversary of my father's passing, and it means a lot to me that other people remember him and share stories. And when you have a perinatal loss of a before birth or shortly after birth, there's very little memory, surely, that others have. And so they want to be memory. They want the baby to be remembered, and they find much comfort, the parents find much comfort in just hearing the baby's name used. Is very comforting. Donating milk is sometimes what some parents choose to do, so that as a way of creating a memory, and as a way that their babies, something that their babies, as we've heard in other talks, that their babies do to help others live on. A couple of quotes. There have been some incredible quotes coming from so many places that we can see the themes coming through them. Lainey has given other babies the gift of nourishment and health, which adds to the numerous ways she has touched our lives. And I hope that our story gives other families strength when they need it, so they don't feel that they are alone. Because no matter how much this is experienced, families feel very much alone. Remember, you are never alone. You just have to find your people. And this picture here on the right is a letter that we received with a donation from a mother who experienced a full-term loss. Our prayer is that this milk will give life and health to another baby. Although the gift is from us as parents, it's her milk essentially. And in a way, it's from her. So there is this joint feeling of a joint contribution to others. So I would like to talk a few minutes about what we do at the Human Milk Banking Association of North America. And my experience is mostly with Mother's Milk Bank Northeast. And just as a little bit of background, the Human Milk Banking Association of North America, which nobody likes to say too often, so we call it HMBANA, it's too many words, is a group of 33 milk banks in the US and Canada. And it combines both hospital-based milk banks, which is most of what we've been hearing about today, but also there are, as there are in other countries, freestanding milk banks that are their own organizations that are not directly affiliated with a hospital, but serve more regionally. So just some kind of practical information. When we screen our donors, which is the first step, that's usually the donor's first contact with the milk bank. The donor must be the one to contact the milk bank. We get calls all the time from fathers and grandmothers of the baby who died, mothers of the bereaved parents, mothers-in-law, hospital staff, friends. They can call us to gather information, but the screening must begin with the donor herself when she is ready. And that's really important. Most milk banks in our system have no minimum donation for bereaved donors. We do have a minimum donation. For other donors, bereaved donors, we will take what they can send us. Part of our screening process involves a pediatrician signing off on the health of the baby. Clearly, that is not involved here. We are very careful not to send those forms to them. Some milk banks, as we've heard from others, do send take milk to be used for research that cannot be used for other babies, and with the mother's permission that it will be used for research. And one of the things that we have found, as you see from this quote, I contacted the extraordinarily kind people at the Mother's Milk Bank Northeast, and they asked if I was still pumping. I instantly knew that I wanted to be. She hadn't thought about it, but part of the way we support parents and donors is by just the asking of these questions and letting them know what the options are, that it is their decision to make whether they want to do it or not. We also spend a lot of time thinking about and working on creating spaces for our donors to grow around their grief. We have, I'll see in the next couple, this slide and the next slide, what we call our memory walls, often in the form of trees. This is the quilt. We have a quilted tree that was actually created by one of our staff members on our wall. And each of those leaves has on it the name of one of our babies who has passed. And you'll see in a minute that other milk banks have similar walls. And we have mementos for parents, as was described. Also, we sometimes also send them a photo of the tree. We send them, when we put up their cloth leaf, we actually make 2 leaves. One we give to them to put in their memory box or wherever they want to put it. We send, an anniversary card when they're on the baby's first birthday, to let them know we're still thinking about them. These are some memory walls from other milk banks, just so you can see them. This, if you look carefully, these are not actually leaves. These are butterflies on a tree. This is from the New York Milk Bank that has the name, first name, and the birth date of the babies. This picture, I hope you can see my arrow here, is a starry night. This is a milk bank in the Chicago area, that each star has the name and I think the birth date of the baby. The one to its right is the milk bank in Virginia, which is a coastal city and also has a naval base. So the water is very important to them. And they talk about legacy donation. This wonderful little mermaid here is the part of the logo of the city. And so they added that to their wall. And then each of these mini shells here, they aren't so small in real life, has the name and I think birth date of the baby. And this last one that I have is the milk bank in Orlando, Florida, which Orlando is not actually on the water, but Orlando is a very long, narrow state. So nobody is ever that far from the water, and water is an important also part of the culture and the life there. They do not have a wall. They actually have a sandbox. It's flat to the ground, a sandbox, which has in its sand, and you have here these shells that are designed, put together to look like angel's wings, but each shell, you can't see it very well, but each shell here has the name and birth date of a baby on it. So there are lots of different ways that each milk bank has of creating these memorial spaces that are very public, and that's part of the point. We also send, this is from our milk bank, but other milk banks do similar. We send, to all of our donors, we send a certificate when they finish donating with their name and the baby's name and how many ounces. And in a bereavement situation, we have the donor's name and then in honor of her child and her child's name. Whoops, I had not meant to do that. And again, we hear from the parents, Gavin and I did this together. It was so special. I'm thankful that his journey and donation were acknowledged by placing his name on a leaf. It's very, very important that their babies be acknowledged publicly, and I get that. My soul has a little comfort knowing that Ryder and I have helped other babies become strong and healthy so they can go home to their families and live a fulfilling life. We also very consciously put out efforts at sharing the loss, both privately with other bereaved parents and also more publicly. So our milk bank has a private Facebook group just for bereaved donors so that they have a space in which they can communicate with one another outside, away from the eyes of the community, but with one another. We also, as do other milk banks, we have very generous mothers and donors who not only donate their milk, but also their stories that we share, again, very publicly with their permission. That's the point of the blog. That other bereaved parents can read, that our milk recipients can read. Everybody can be a part of that experience and learn from it. And the families, the donor families, the bereaved donor families feel that support. This picture here is the postcard that we send on the baby's first birthday. We send to all of our donors, but the postcard that we send to other donors with babies is a little more colorful and celebratory. How do we make space for grief in the community at large? And what is milk banking's role in that? So as we've heard a little bit today, who can help in the community beyond the boundaries, the borders of the milk bank? Families, friends, colleagues, employers, faith community, faith leaders, healthcare providers all have a role in helping families, bereaved families, to grow around their grief, to create the space that they need, not to let go of the grief, but to grow around it. And in hearing from families, what are the most important things for helpers, for the community members, for the friends, for the family members to know about this, about how to talk to them in loss? Because people often express they're afraid to talk to the parents. They're afraid, they're saying, I don't want to talk to the parents about it because I'm afraid it will remind them of the passing. And our experience with the parents who've experienced the loss is that they don't forget. They will never forget. You're not going to remind them of something they don't already know. The loss never, ever goes away. I mean, we hear that, from Emerita, who talked to a father who lost his child 22 years ago, and it still feels very, very fresh. Another line that we hear often that people say is, well, you can, especially unfortunately, or often unfortunately, healthcare providers who say, well, you're lucky, you're young, you can have another child. Another child is not this child. This child died. Another child is another conversation. And it's important for us to know that and to educate the community at large about the importance of these messages. And that time and new experiences will help to create spaces around the grief. And so how do we do that? How do we create that space? Again, don't be shy. And this is for all community members, hospital staff, healthcare providers, family, friends. Talk about the baby. Talk about the baby. Use the baby's name. Ask questions. Parents will guide you in terms of what they want to talk about, what they need to hear. And help by creating new experiences while remaining aware of the baby. And those that there are plenty of examples. It's a very personal thing, depending on the family and depending on your relationship with the family, how to do that. But it's important to create that space. And for healthcare providers, providing information, resources, where can they go for help? There's a group in the United States, I don't know whether it's international, called Compassionate Friends. It's a wonderful organization that is specifically support for parents who have lost children. And they are a wonderful group. There are other groups as well. And Emerita clearly is doing work in that area as well. And it's very, very important, not only that work be done, but that the families who need it know about it. So how do milk banks help with this? How do we, what's our contribution? I think an important piece of our contribution is that we model for the public how to help families grow around their grief. And by doing so, we are removing some of the taboo that we've all talked about and some of the shame. There's absolutely nothing, as we know, to be ashamed of in a loss, but somehow parents experience that shame by it's being hidden, by saying, I don't want to talk, I don't want to remind the parents. And so by the way that we talk with families, we remove that taboo, we remove that shame. We acknowledge the loss, but we focus on the task at hand. When mom calls to donate, we're focusing on the screening, and by doing so, but acknowledging the loss and asking for the baby's name and asking questions, we are creating that space around the grief. We use the baby's name, obviously, in contact on the walls. Some milk banks have community-wide programs. Some milk banks have support groups for these families also. And we create, as we said with the blogs, a social media presence. Again, making the issue public, putting it out there in the community and saying, this is important. We need to be able to talk about this with care and with sensitivity, and letting the families who are bereaved lead the way in what they need from us. Last topic, and this is a much broader topic, but my training is in social policy, so I think in terms of policy. An issue that has arisen, and I can only speak for policy in the United States. I would love to hear what other countries do. In 1938, the first U.S. Fair Labor Standards Act was signed into law. 1938 is a long time ago now. And originally it had, it really addressed issues like fair wages, overtime pay, no child labor, things that we fortunately largely at this point are able to take for granted. It has been updated multiple times since 1938. In 2010, there was an amendment added called the Break Time for Nursing Mothers Act. And that was an act requiring employers to provide a reasonable break time for an employee to express milk for her nursing child for 1 year after the child's birth. Seems reasonable. This phrase, for her nursing child, came in many places to be interpreted as, if you don't have a nursing child, you can't take the break. And we have one of our very early bereaved donors who has been an advocate for donation through grief for a long time now, was told in so many words by her employer, you can't pump because your baby is dead. I cannot even imagine saying those words to somebody. But clearly this phrase needed to be addressed. And so, and the lactation community, the breastfeeding community has been working on addressing this and updating it for the last 11 years. And I am very excited. This is very new news. This PUMP Act, PUMP stands for something. It's an abbreviation, but I can't remember what. PUMP for Nursing Mothers Act is the most recent update to that Fair Workers Act. It just passed about 2 weeks ago. And it says, if an employee begins providing breast milk for a nursing child or gives birth, including to a stillborn child or a child over whom the employee does not retain legal custody, those people still can pump at work. And who does not retain custody can include gestational carriers and can include mothers whose baby is not in her custody, whether it's for drug use reasons or some other reason the child is not in her custody. She can still pump at work for the baby or for donation. And the timing has been increased to up to 2 years after birth, which is quite remarkable, actually, for if anybody knows anything about US policy. So that is addressing the issue specifically of pumping at work for bereaved families where there is no, or where there's no custody of a child. Another issue that has arisen recently, not here, not only in the US, I've heard in other countries as well, is the issue of parental leave after loss. There are no US standards for parental leave after loss. In fact, there are barely any US standards for parental leave if there's a live child. I'm not going there today. But when a baby dies, parents are still parents. There's a physical postpartum recovery. There's clearly emotional and practical adjustment to being parents without a child, but there's still that adjustment. And so there's beginning to be a call, again, not only in the US, this is also happening in other countries, to include some parental leave after loss. I know New Zealand passed a law not too long ago covering bereavement after miscarriage. Those kinds of laws are beginning to come into play. I think what's important for us as advocates and for the legislators who will pass these laws to keep in mind is that fortunately, perinatal loss is rare for most of us in the countries where we live. And so when you take the impact of perinatal loss across the entire country or region where a law would be implemented, the impact on any one workplace at any one time will be minimal. If any one workplace has this happen once a year or once every couple of years, or it's rare. However, so it will not have a huge impact on each workplace, but the impact on affected parents is enormous. Knowing that this is put into the law, that this is put into the policies of a company, that we are aware of this, that we care, that we think about this, that impact can be enormous and worth doing. And it's been shown over and over again that parental leave and pumping at work and all of these things, the company will not go bankrupt if mothers take pumping breaks, and the company will not go bankrupt providing parental leave, and the company will also, and the country will also not go completely bankrupt providing parental leave after loss. So economic arguments just don't quite hold water. And I think a final point is that the compassion of such a policy and such a regulation will ripple out to other policies and practices. And this world in general can use more compassion than it has now. And there's no better place to start than here and now in the areas in which we are working and we are thinking about things. And it's our opportunity as advocates to lead the way for others as well. And I'll stop share.
Thank you so much, Naomi. This is wonderful in terms of thinking about a lot of these things. I was thinking, I always think historically. So I was immediately thinking about, I was trying to remember what year the first guidelines for the US came out. I think it was 32 or 1932.
Guidelines for
the American guidelines for milk banks. It was written by McAndrew. And
oh, that was right. That was a very long time ago.
That one actually did mention bereaved mothers. And it said that you should not allow them to donate. Aliette, you remember reading this as well. And so I find that interesting because it's an early policy statement as well, saying that that's not there, but it's connected also to some of the things that we've all been talking about today. I was just looking, we have lots of people saying thank you to everybody in terms of thinking about these things. I'm trying to pay attention to questions as well. Aliette, did you have any questions that you wanted to ask Naomi? I've written a ton of things, so I don't want to talk forever. So.
I'm just, it's not really a question. It's just that I felt very attached, and I had this personal relationship to the things that you talked about, because one of the mother, for example, that you mentioned, that was insulted in her work. So she was one of my the women that I interviewed, and she really helped me during my my studies. And also Tanya and I are doing now a research about memorial walls. So I felt, so it was, everything was wonderful. So thank you. Yeah.
I was going to say,
do you want to mention this?
A number of your points, Naomi, about the cultural meanings of the walls and the way they are presented are really important. We were thinking as outsiders, and I think it's very interesting to bring the inside in. And so Aliette and I will revisit this and talk to you about that again, because I think those are important things. One of the things that you alluded to, or at least I seem to think of when I looked at one of the things, was the wave of light that seemed to be part of those images. Was that part of what you were thinking about as well, in terms of?
You're talking about the walls?
Yeah.
I think for some, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that was part of what went into the design of them. Absolutely. Absolutely. I think the other thing that I forgot to mention, the New York Milk Bank that has the butterflies. Butterflies has become, at least in this country, maybe internationally, I don't know, kind of a well-accepted symbol of parents losing a child. not just perinatal loss, but parents losing a child in general. And so that is very poignant on that wall.
So part of that is because of metamorphosis. It's about change.
Right.
And
right.
So yeah, my son's grave has 2 butterflies on it. So, and
right.
that was 17.
Right. As does my sister-in-law's, who died when she was in her 30s. So it's not just about.
Yeah. And those are interesting points though too. Whether they travel internationally or not is also another point. Some of the things that I often think about, because I always wear purple, and I think of purple as social scientists, I think of this as a color that captures both pink and blue, so it has gender qualities, but also in terms of bereavement, it's often thought of as the color to represent death. And so I'm able to have a gendered presentation or embracing at the same time as thinking about some of those things. So, and I was looking at some of the colors in some of the walls, and it's one of the things that Aliette and I have talked about with the walls as well. So in terms of, I also think the one from the quilt, is that from your bank?
That's our milk bank.
Yeah. That whole notion of women and the production of hand producing things, that was.
Yes, I think we had been talking about it for some time, developing it. And part of it is just that a number of us at the milk bank do various forms of handy, sewing and knitting and quilting and so forth. And the person who made the quilt is one of our donor intake coordinators, who screens donors all the time, who is clearly a talented artist. Before she became a nurse, she actually majored in art in college, and that shows out also. So we were very, very fortunate to have her to design that quilt. But each of those designs is really unique, and each of the designs, and there were others, these are the only ones I had on hand, but that really, each memorial wall has its own story, and they're amazing stories. And it's cultural, and it involves an enormous amount of thought and creativity, and clearly some of them are very local.
Which is, I want to maybe share.
I was going to say
from my interviews, when I talked with women, so they said that the fact, they talked about the therapeutic component of the wall, in terms of like, this is the only place on earth that if, for instance, like her baby name was Ethan, so this is the only place that knows her as Ethan's mom. Because when she goes, grocery shopping, whatever she goes, no matter where she goes, nobody knows her, and so as his mom. So in terms of the identity and just reinforcing, her identity as a mother, or as a bereaved mother, it's a huge thing, and I think it's very, very important. And if we're talking about also local, how things transfer or not in terms of cultures and local. So in Israel, we don't have a memorial wall. We have a thank you wall. So if you donated, no matter if you bereaved or not, you just get this thank you note on the wall, which is also beautiful, but in a way, like, how we as a society, put emphasis and like give space to the grief. So I found those walls so incredibly important in terms of changing the discourse within the society, and also within the family, as a family, unit. So
yeah.
I was just going to point out, Naomi, that Debbie Noble-Carr is still awake in Australia.
Yes, I noticed that.
And she just actually pointed out that they're designing a quilt there as well. And I think that tactile feature is an interesting component, and also the history of quilt production in terms of women's production, I think is all really interesting. So I think it's great. And and thank you, Debbie, for staying awake and mentioning that. It's wonderful. So I also wanted to just quickly ask you about, you mentioned the separate space on Facebook for bereaved families. I think that that's really interesting. One of the things that I've heard before and that was part of my own experience is this notion of belonging to a group, but not wanting other members. And so you actually, this is, it is what has happened to you, and other people have had this happen, but you don't want to actively encourage people to be part of this group. So I wondered if you could comment more about that separate space for them and how you guys thought of that.
I have to think about how the idea, I mean, when at the time that we were creating the quilt, we also had a program on, to dedicate the quilt. And I was amazed. People came to this program, traveled hundreds of miles to be there, to be part of this moment, but also to have the opportunity to meet other parents who had experienced this. And it's on our Facebook page. We did the part of the program in Facebook Live, the formal presentations, and then we opened up the floor for people to be able to just say what they wanted to say. And that part we did not record because we didn't have any of their permission to do so. But I think from that idea grew the idea that these families really need a space that's their own. And we have to admit someone to that space because it is a private Facebook group, but if anyone, it's not limited to our area. So if anyone else wanted to join that group, we would facilitate that happening. And it's not a super busy group, but there will be posts sometimes when a birthday anniversary comes up, or always around Mother's Day, those kinds of moments when there's a need for people to talk to each other, someone else who's been there and who understands it in a way that those who have not just cannot possibly understand it.
I think that that's really interesting too, that those dates trigger things as well. And
yeah,
certainly in terms of Mother's Day often, and Father's Day, because that's the other component of what we've been discussing today. I know there is this movement in some places, I don't know if it's global or not, in terms of bereaved Mother's Day, which I think
just before Mother's Day.
That's the problem is that sets that off, as opposed to, once again, recognizing that you are a mother, that so I started to wonder, were there other parents who felt better with that or not? But that's probably a separate question in terms of it, and recognizing that people are different, and there are different ways to grieve, and everyone grieves differently, and there is no right or wrong way in terms of thinking about these things. And what we're trying to do here, obviously, is communicate about all of those things. So, and that was another point that you made in terms of asking questions and allowing people to talk, I think is really important. And that's what today's been about.
Right, exactly.
So I'm so glad that you contributed. Thank you so much, Naomi.
And thank you everybody for putting this together. It was just to all the speakers. It was a lot of work, and I learned a lot. So I appreciate it.
I have one other thing.
Announcement. We have announcements. Tanya, don't forget.
Yeah, I have one more thing that I wanted to show everyone, and if I can find it, because I have everybody else's webinar things up here. So there we are. We can see mine there, I believe. And I'll actually just have things all over the place here. So this is what I was going to say is that Aliette and I have been working on these things, as I mentioned, since since 2019 when we first got introduced, thanks to Naomi, and thinking about these things.
Or a matchmaker.
Yeah, and we've been working on a number of things. Both of us have doing it before and now working together and working with people like Debbie Burnett and UCAM and all of the wonderful people who contributed today. But we also have been very fortunate that the Maternal and Child Nutrition Journal, of which I was involved with because of the work that I did at UCLAN, they have kindly agreed to allow a special issue on the topic of bereavement and lactation to be published in October next year, which will be to mark the Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Month, which is part of the stories that we were talking about in terms of waves of light and some of these components. So we are hoping that anyone listening or anyone who's not able to listen, because I know that many people in some parts of the world, it is much earlier in the day. I had heard from colleagues who were in California who were not able to join us. So we're hoping that they'll be able to hear about this later when we have the recordings up. We are looking for submissions by May so that we can follow a timeline that allows us to publish by October. And if anyone has any questions, please contact either myself or Aliette or both of us. We're going to work together. We're going to work with UCAM, and we will work with hopefully HMBANA and EMBA and GAMBA and all of the groups around the world to try to continue the conversation so that we can think about these things and recognize the complexity of these things. And with that note, I wanted to also point out something that I was very proud that I was involved in back just before my Fulbright, helping the organization PATH, which is in Seattle, and they're not awake, but Kirsten Israel Ballard is involved with HMBANA, and she had said that she had wished she could join us. I think she registered, but she's not able to be here. And she wanted us to remind people that this is one toolkit that they put together that is freely available online. I can send.
Someone put that link in the chat so that we can actually get to it.
Yes, absolutely. I can do that, no problem. I'll stop sharing and do that. And in terms of this, that toolkit, it's available to be adapted cross-culturally and make it relevant for specific areas in terms of how people think about it. And I'll put that in the chat right now. So I just wanted to point that out. Do any of our speakers or anyone else have anything else they would like to add? We have a couple of minutes for final comments or thoughts from anyone.
That make it into the chat?
Yes, it's in the chat now.
I'm not seeing it in the chat. Oh, there it is. Yes, thank you.
So, Debbie Burnett, are you still here?
Yeah, of course, I'm still here.
Yeah, I figured you were. I just didn't see you because the webinar doesn't allow me to see you.
Yeah.
So do you want to have the final word in terms of thinking about things? I'd be
sure. I really just want to thank Tanya and Ella for the organization, because it's been I think an amazing forum. I want to thank our speakers. I wrote down the word stories because I think the thing for me that came through from all of the presentations was the stories, the parent stories, those working in milk banks, those working with bereaved mothers and fathers. So for me, it was very much about the stories and what we can learn from the stories. I've written down lots of notes, quilted trees and cards on first birthdays and art school, thinking I'll contact our amazing art school in Glasgow. I've written down private spaces on social media. So I think certainly from my perspective as chair of UCAM, I'm really excited to look to see how we can really develop this program, a bereavement program that really meets the needs of everyone who might be touched by loss and milk donation. And I think that, you know, reaching out to our colleagues in the milk banks and really talking to them, telling them the stories, I think, that we've heard today, and hopefully getting them engaged in this process. I'm very much looking forward to contributing to the special edition in October next year, and I look forward to that being published. I just think that the work that has been going on and will continue around this really sensitive topic is so important. I was saying to my staff today that we were in such a privileged position. In fact, we were talking about, and one of our wonderful driver volunteers is unfortunately leaving us because she's going to live in an area that makes it very difficult for her to continue to do some of our driving. And we were talking about how she was often the volunteer who went out to mums who'd had a loss because she was incredibly good with them. And she was telling us some of those stories. And actually, that's another part of this, I guess, as well, is it's not just about the milk banks, it's actually about the volunteers who pick up and drop off our milk. There's so many people that this touches. So thank you all for sharing these stories. And I look forward to hearing more of them as we continue along this journey.
I was just going to say, Debbie, that we've been fortunate that some of the attendees covered all of those groups. And so I want to thank everyone for attending as well, because we will save the chat. We will actually spend time making sure that this information is disseminated as much as possible, and we will continue the conversation. So we have, I'm just reading chat things here, and we will keep them all. And for those people who were not able to join us for everything, we will make available whatever we can make available. And for some confidential reasons, some of the presenters have asked that some of the things are not available. But most of the things, I believe, will be available. And as I said, we'll move to the next step that UCAM's going to support and Debbie's going to support, which is wonderful, and we appreciate that. So I think in terms of this, we're now perfect on time. We did well. And I think we had a fair bit of time for discussion. I've looked at questions here, and there are no additional ones that we haven't answered yet, but I do echo what Debbie said in thanking all of our speakers and all of the attendees, everyone that's contributed an awful lot, and Aliette especially. And we're just going to keep working. I love this international connection. So.
Yeah. Tanya, one thing we should probably just mention is that we are also working on a series of shorter webinars, probably around an hour long. And there will be more news about those. The Scientific Advisory Board for UCAM is meeting, I think, hopefully the next month or so. And hopefully we will have some dates for those shorter 1 hour webinars that we're going to put out as well. On various different topics.
Half-day ones take a long time to organize.
Yeah, exactly. So we also want to we want to do some. Yeah.
The last thing I was going to say is I really have to thank Justin for all of his amazing help, because it's been so wonderful that DCU supports us through Justin and through all of these things to do this. He's been absolutely wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, completely. So there'll be stuff out on Twitter, hopefully in the next few weeks, with our next lot of speakers and webinars when they're available. And we will look to get these onto our website, hopefully in the not too distant future.
Right. and we'll stay in touch with everyone and keep talking about things.
Yep.
And there are people who are listening. So
yeah, indeed. Thank you, everyone.
Yes,
Good
thank
night.
you, everyone.
Good night. In
Or
Australia,
good morning.
Yes, Debbie, you're going to go to sleep now.
Good morning.
Yeah.
3 a.m.
Amazing.
I haven't been up this late since
Oh my
night
goodness.
feeding my kids, and that was over 12
thank
weeks
you,
ago.
Debbie. Thank you,
Thank
Debbie.
you.